The afternoon sun filtered softly through the worn curtains of the Johnson family's modest living room, casting long shadows across the faded carpet. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet hum of a small radio playing a soulful tune. For the Johnsons, this was home, a place filled with laughter, memories, and the kind of warmth that no house could ever replicate. But today, that warmth was shattered. A sharp knock at the door jolted everyone. Marcus, the father, exchanged a worried glance with his wife, Angela. Their two children, Maya and Elijah, looked up from their homework, sensing the sudden tension. When Marcus opened the door, a stern-faced man in a crisp suit handed him a thick envelope. No words were exchanged. The man's eyes flicked coldly over the family before he turned and walked away. Angela's hands trembled as she took the envelope, breaking the seal with a mix of dread and disbelief. Inside was an eviction notice, official, final, and devastating. The landlord claimed they had violated terms of their lease, but the Johnsons knew the truth was far more insidious. "How can this be?" Angela whispered, her voice cracking. "We've done nothing wrong." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They want us out," just like that. Maya's eyes welled with tears. "But this is our home. Where will we go?" Elijah clenched his fists, anger and fear swirling inside him. The family huddled together, their unity a fragile shield against the storm gathering outside their door. Could they really be forced out of their home just because of the color of their skin? As the weight of the notice settled, so did a fierce determination. This wasn't just about a house. It was about justice, dignity, and standing up against a system designed to push them out. Little did they know, the battle ahead would expose truths no one expected, and the courtroom would become the stage for a fight that would leave everyone speechless. But first, they had to prepare. The Johnson family had called the Eastwood neighborhood home for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't just a place on a map. It was a community stitched together by shared stories, struggles, and celebrations. Marcus and Angela had moved here shortly after their wedding, drawn by the promise of a safe environment to raise their children and build a future. Over the years, they had watched the neighborhood change, some for the better, some for the worse, but their roots only grew deeper. Marcus, a quiet but steadfast man in his early 40s, worked as a mechanic at the local garage. His hands, callous from years of labor, told stories of dedication and resilience. He was the kind of father who showed love through action, fixing a broken bike, coaching Elijah's little league team, or simply sitting with his family after a long day. Angela, warm and fiercely protective, balanced her part-time job at the community center with managing the household. Her laughter was infectious, and her determination to see her children succeed was unwavering. Maya, their 16-year-old daughter, was a bright student with dreams of becoming a lawyer. She spent hours buried in books, fueled by a desire to fight injustices like the ones her family now faced. Elijah, 12, was a family spark, curious, outspoken, and full of energy. He idolized his older sister and often mimicked her passion for fairness and truth. The Johnsons were more than just neighbors. They were pillars of the community. Angela organized food drives. Marcus volunteered at the youth center, and their home was a gathering place for friends and family. Their neighbors knew them as kind, hardworking, and deeply committed to making Eastwood a better place. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared their vision. Across the street lived Mr. Harold Whitman, the landlord who owned several properties in Eastwood. Whitman was a man in his 60s, known for his sharp suits and sharper tongue. He had inherited the properties from his father and ran his business with a cold efficiency that left little room for empathy. Rumors swirled about his disdain for the longtime residents, especially families like the Johnsons. Whispers of discriminatory practices and underhanded tactics followed him like a shadow, though nothing had ever been proven until now. Whitman's reputation was built on profit, not people. He saw the changing demographics of Eastwood as an opportunity to push out families he deemed undesirable and replace them with wealthier tenants. His subtle prejudices were masked by legal jargon and carefully worded notices, but those who knew him understood the truth beneath the surface. Despite the looming threat, the Johnsons had allies. At the community center where Angela worked, A small but passionate group of activists had begun to organize against unfair housing practices. Among them was Rosa, a fiery advocate with a background in civil rights law, who had taken a special interest in the Johnsons' case. She believed their fight was bigger than one family. It was a stand against systemic injustice. As the days passed, the tension in the neighborhood grew. The eviction notice was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of a battle that would test the strength of the Johnson family and the community around them. Then came the day the eviction notice was formally served. Whitman's lawyer arrived at the Johnsons' doorstep, delivering the final warning with a cold smile. The stakes had never been higher. The family's future, their home, and their dignity hung in the balance. What no one expected was how this fight would unravel secrets, forge unexpected alliances, and challenge the very foundations of power in Eastwood. The courtroom doors were about to open, and the Johnsons were ready to step inside. The morning air was heavy with tension as Mr. Harold Whitman strode up the Johnsons' front steps, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the cracked concrete. His face was set in a smug expression, eyes cold and calculating. Behind him, his lawyer followed silently, clutching a thick folder that seemed to carry the weight of the family's future. Marcus opened the door, his posture stiff but polite. Whitman didn't bother with pleasantries. Instead, he thrust the eviction notice into Marcus's hands, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been given every chance, Mr. Johnson, but your lease violations leave me no choice. You're out." Angela peered behind Marcus, her eyes narrowing as she took in Whitman's arrogant demeanor. "Lease violations? What are you talking about? We've always paid on time and kept the place in good condition." Whitman smirked, the hint of a sneer barely concealed. "It's not about the rent, Mrs. Johnson. It's about the neighborhood's future. We need tenants who fit the image we're trying to build here." Maya stepped forward, her voice steady but fierce. "So you're saying we don't belong here because of who we are?" Whitman's eyes flicked to her, then away, as if uncomfortable with the question. "I'm simply enforcing the rules. You can take it up with the courts if you like, but I suggest you don't waste your time." Elijah clenched his fists, his youthful anger bubbling to the surface. "You're just trying to push us out because we're black. Everyone knows it." Whitman's smile vanished, replaced by a cold glare. "Watch your tone, boy. This isn't about race. It's about business." Angela's voice trembled but held firm. "This is discrimination, plain and simple. We won't be intimidated." Whitman's lawyer stepped forward, clearing his throat. "If you refuse to vacate, we will proceed with legal action immediately. You'll be responsible for all court costs and damages." The room seemed to close in around the Johnsons. The eviction notice felt heavier now, a symbol of a fight that was far from over. Marcus looked at his family, Angela's determined eyes, Maya's fierce resolve, Elijah's clenched fists, and something inside him shifted. The shock and fear began to harden into something stronger. Determination. "We're not going anywhere," Marcus said quietly but firmly. "We'll fight this." Whitman's smirk returned, but it was less certain now. "We'll see about that." As Whitman and his lawyer turned and walked away, the Johnsons stood together, united but uncertain. The path ahead was unclear, filled with legal battles and unknown challenges. Will the family stand a chance against the powerful landlord? The question hung in the air as the Johnsons began to seek help. Legal advice, community support, and the strength to face a system stacked against them. The days that followed the eviction notice were some of the hardest the Johnson family had ever faced. What began as a shock quickly spiraled into a relentless storm of challenges that tested their resolve at every turn. Marcus spent long hours at the garage, his hands working tirelessly, but his mind was elsewhere, haunted by the looming threat of losing their home. Angela juggled her job at the community center with endless phone calls, trying to find legal help and rally support. Maya buried herself in research, determined to understand the law and find any loophole that could save them. Elijah, once full of youthful energy, grew quieter, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The financial strain was immediate and brutal. Legal fees piled up faster than they could manage. The family's savings meant for college tuition and emergencies began to dwindle. Every dollar spent on lawyers and paperwork was a dollar taken from their future. The community, once a source of comfort, was divided. Some neighbors offered words of encouragement and small donations, but others kept their distance, wary of getting involved in a fight they feared to lose. Amid the growing pressure, a beacon of hope appeared in the form of Rosa Martinez, a passionate civil rights lawyer who had dedicated her career to fighting housing discrimination. Rosa's reputation preceded her, known for taking on powerful landlords and winning. When Angela reached out to her, Rosa didn't hesitate. She saw in the Johnsons' case a chance to expose a pattern of injustice that had long been ignored. Rosa's first step was to dig into Whitman's history. What she uncovered was disturbing. Multiple complaints had been filed against him over the years. Families pushed out under suspicious circumstances, maintenance neglected in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, and lease terms suddenly changed without notice. Yet, Whitman had always managed to evade serious consequences, using legal loopholes and intimidation tactics. At the same time, a neighbor named Mrs. Evelyn Carter, an elderly woman who had lived in Eastwood for over 50 years, stepped forward. She had witnessed Whitman's tactics firsthand and was willing to testify. Her stories painted a picture of a man who saw the community not as people, but as obstacles to his profit. But the fight was far from straightforward. As the Johnsons prepared their case, they faced moments of betrayal and doubt. A close friend, fearing repercussions, distanced themselves. A local council member, who had promised support, remained silent when the eviction became public. The family's unity was tested as stress, and fear crept into their daily lives. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in the dim light of their kitchen, Rosa arrived with a folder that could change everything. Inside were documents, emails, financial records, and a hidden ledger that suggested Whitman had deliberately targeted minority tenants to clear the way for more lucrative developments. The evidence was damning, but it was only the beginning. "This," Rosa said, her voice steady but urgent, "is the proof we need to show the court that this eviction isn't just about a lease violation. It's about discrimination, plain and simple." The room fell silent. The weight of the moment was palpable. For the first time, the Johnsons saw a real path forward, a chance not just to save their home, but to challenge a system that had long ignored their voices. Yet, the stakes had never been higher. Whitman's legal team was ruthless, and the courtroom battle promised to be brutal. The family's future, their dignity, and the very soul of their community hung in the balance. As the day of the trial approached, anticipation and anxiety grew. The Johnsons knew this was more than a fight for their home. It was a fight for justice. Would the truth be enough to overcome the power and prejudice stacked against them? The courtroom doors loomed ahead, ready to open on a battle that would captivate the community and leave no one untouched. The days leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of preparation, strategy sessions, and quiet moments of reflection for the Johnson family. Rosa Martinez, their lawyer, worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence that would expose the truth behind Harold Whitman's eviction tactics. What had started as a simple fight to keep a home was now a battle to reveal a deeply entrenched system of discrimination. Rosa's investigation had uncovered a trove of documents, emails between Whitman and his associates, internal memos, and financial records that painted a damning picture. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a calculated plan to push out minority families and replace them with wealthier tenants, all under guise of business decisions. The eviction notices were carefully crafted to appear legal, but the underlying motives were clear. One afternoon, Rosa gathered the Johnsons around the kitchen table, spreading out the evidence before them. "This is what we're going to present in court," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "It shows a pattern of discrimination, illegal eviction tactics, and attempts to cover it all up." Marcus leaned forward, eyes scanning the documents. "So, this is what he's been hiding all along." Angela nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "We've been fighting this alone for too long. Now we have a real chance." Maya, ever the determined student, looked up with a spark in her eyes. "This is bigger than just us. If we win, it could change things for everyone in Eastwood." Elijah, sitting quietly beside his sister, finally spoke. "We have to do this. For us, and for everyone else who's been pushed out." The family's unity was palpable, despite the fear and uncertainty. Their resolve had never been stronger. They were no longer just victims. They were fighters, ready to stand up against injustice. But just as hope began to swell, Rosa uncovered something even more shocking. Hidden deep within Whitman's files was a confidential report, an internal audit that revealed the landlord had knowingly falsified maintenance records and manipulated lease agreements to create grounds for eviction. Worse, the report suggested that Whitman had bribed a local official to overlook these violations, ensuring his schemes went unchallenged. "This changes everything," Rosa said, her voice low but intense. "If we can prove this in court, it will not only invalidate the eviction, but also expose criminal behavior." The room fell silent. The weight of the revelation was immense. The Johnsons realized that the fight ahead was not just legal. It was a battle against corruption and abuse of power. As the trial date approached, the family prepared themselves mentally and emotionally. They practiced their testimonies, leaned on each other for support, and drew strength from the community rallying behind them. The courtroom was no longer just a place of judgment. It was a stage for truth. But the question lingered. How would Whitman respond to this bombshell? Would he crumble under the pressure, or would he fight back with even more ruthless tactics? The tension was electric, the stakes higher than ever. The Johnsons stood on the brink of a confrontation that would not only decide their fate, but could change the course of their community's future. The courtroom doors were about to open, and the battle for justice was ready to begin. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation, and the low murmur of whispered conversations. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the front row where the Johnson family sat together, hands tightly clasped, faces a mixture of nerves and determination. Across the room, Harold Whitman sat with his legal team, his usual confident smirk replaced by a tight, guarded expression. The battle that had been brewing for months was finally coming to a head. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The trial began with opening statements that set the tone for what was to come. Rosa Martinez spoke with passion and precision, laying out the case against Whitman. She painted a vivid picture of a landlord who had abused his power, targeting minority families with discriminatory eviction tactics designed to displace them and profit from gentrification. Whitman's lawyer countered with cold efficiency, dismissing the claims as baseless and accusing the Johnsons of violating lease terms. He portrayed Whitman as a fair businessman, unfairly maligned by a family desperate to avoid responsibility. But it was the testimonies that truly brought the case to life. Angela took the stand first, her voice steady but filled with emotion as she recounted the day they received the eviction notice. She spoke of the fear that gripped her family, the uncertainty of where they would go, and the pain of being targeted simply because of their race. Her words resonated deeply with everyone in the courtroom, drawing nods of sympathy and quiet gasps. Maya followed, her testimony sharp and articulate. She described her dreams, her dedication to her studies, and how the threat of eviction threatened to shatter everything she had worked for. She spoke not just for herself, but for all the young people in Eastwood who deserved a chance to thrive. Then came Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the elderly neighbor whose decades in the community lent weight to her words. She detailed Whitman's history of discriminatory behavior, the whispered warnings she had heard, and the patterns of neglect and intimidation that had plagued the neighborhood for years. As the testimonies unfolded, Whitman's composure began to crack. His eyes darted nervously, his usual arrogance replaced by frustration. When Rosa presented the damning documents, the falsified maintenance records, the bribery allegations, the courtroom gasped. Whitman's lawyer scrambled to discredit the evidence, but the weight of truth was undeniable. Marcus, who had remained silent until now, was called to stand. His testimony was simple but powerful. A man fighting to protect his family's home, standing against a system designed to push them out. His quiet strength moved many in the courtroom, including the judge. Throughout the trial, the community's support was palpable. Friends, neighbors, and activists filled the gallery, their presence a silent testament to the broader fight for justice. The media coverage amplified the story, turning the Johnson struggle into a symbol of resistance against systemic racism and housing discrimination. As the final arguments were made, Rosa's closing statement was a call to conscience. She urged the court to see beyond legal technicalities and recognize the human cost of Whitman's actions. This is not just about one family's home. she said. It's about the right of every person to live with dignity and security, free from discrimination and fear. Whitman's lawyer responded with a last-ditch effort to paint the Johnsons as troublemakers, but the damage was done. The courtroom was charged with emotion, the scales of justice tipping toward truth. The judge called for a recess before delivering the verdict. The room buzzed with speculation and tension. The Johnson family huddled together, their hearts pounding, knowing that the decision would change everything. As the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent once more. The moment of truth had arrived. But before the verdict could be announced, the judge paused, looking directly at Whitman. There is one final matter that must be addressed before I render my decision. The room held its breath. The judge's decision will change everything. Stay tuned. The courtroom was silent. Every eye fixed on the judge as he cleared his throat and began to speak. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. The Johnson family, their supporters, the media, and even Harold Whitman himself. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes time seem to slow, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the judge intoned, his voice steady and resolute. This court finds that the eviction notice served to the Johnson family was not only unjustified, but also a clear act of discriminatory practice in violation of fair housing laws. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Angela's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Marcus's jaw clenched, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and triumph. Maya's breath caught, and Elijah's fists unclenched, his youthful hope rekindled. The judge continued. Furthermore, the court orders that the eviction notice be rescinded immediately. The Johnson family shall retain possession of their home without interference. Additionally, Mr. Whitman is hereby fined for his illegal eviction tactics and is subject to further investigation for his involvement in corrupt practices. Whitman's face drained to color. His usual arrogance was replaced by shock, disbelief etched into every line of his face. For the first time, the man who had wielded power with impunity was exposed and held accountable. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in a wave of emotion that swept through the crowd like wildfire. Supporters of the Johnson family rose to their feet, applauding and cheering. Tears streamed down faces, strangers embraced, and the weight of years of injustice seemed to lift, if only for a moment. The victory was not just theirs. It belonged to every person who had ever been pushed to the margins, silenced, or made to feel less than. Angela's voice trembled as she spoke to the room. This is more than a win for our family. It's a message to those who think they can silence us, push us out, or erase us. We are here. We belong, and we will fight for justice. Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd, filled with gratitude and determination. This victory is a step forward, but the fight isn't over. We stand together, stronger than ever. The judge's gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the trial, but the impact of the moment reverberated far beyond the courtroom walls. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled to capture every word, and the story spread like wildfire through Eastwood and beyond. Whitman sat frozen, the reality of his downfall sinking in. His empire of intimidation and greed had been cracked open, and the consequences were just beginning. Whispers of further investigations and potential lawsuits swirled around him, signaling that this defeat was only the start of a reckoning. For the Johnson family, the victory was a powerful affirmation of their resilience and courage. Their home was safe, their dignity restored, and their story a beacon of hope for others facing similar battles. As the courtroom emptied, the family lingered a moment longer, holding on to each other, their hearts full. Outside, the community waited, ready to celebrate and to continue the fight for justice that this victory had ignited. The battle had been hard fought, but justice had been delivered, and its echoes would be felt for years to come. The victory in the courtroom was more than just a personal triumph for the Johnson family. It became a catalyst for change that rippled to the entire Eastwood community. In the days and weeks that followed, the atmosphere shifted from one of fear and uncertainty to renewed hope and solidarity. The Johnson story had struck a chord far beyond their own front door, inspiring neighbors, activists, and even local officials to take a closer look at the systemic issues that had long been ignored. Angela found herself at the center of a growing movement. The community center where she worked became a hub for organizing, hosting meetings and workshops focused on tenants' rights and fair housing laws. People who had once felt powerless began to speak out, sharing their own stories of discrimination and eviction. The Johnson family's courage had given them a voice. Marcus, too, became a symbol of resilience. His quiet strength and unwavering commitment to his family resonated deeply with those around him. He started volunteering at local events, speaking openly about the importance of standing up against injustice. His story was featured in local newspapers and on social media, amplifying a message that no one should be forced out of their home because of who they are. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for Harold Whitman began to mount. The court's ruling had opened the door for further investigations into his business practices. Complaints that had been buried or ignored for years were suddenly being taken seriously. Authorities launched inquiries into allegations of bribery and corruption, and several tenants came forward with new evidence of mistreatment. Whitman's reputation, once untouchable, was now tarnished beyond repair. The landlord's properties faced increased scrutiny, with city inspectors conducting thorough reviews and demanding compliance with housing regulations. Some of his tenants, emboldened by the Johnsons' victory, organized to demand repairs and fair treatment. The power dynamic that had long favored Whitman was shifting, and the community was beginning to reclaim its voice. But the fight was far from over. The Johnsons and their allies knew that this case was just one battle in a much larger war against systemic racism and economic inequality. Housing discrimination was a deeply entrenched problem, woven into the fabric of many neighborhoods across the country. The victory in Eastwood was a beacon of hope, but it also highlighted the work that still needed to be done. Local activists called for comprehensive housing reform, pushing for stronger tenant protections, increased affordable housing, and greater accountability for landlords. City council meetings were packed with passionate voices demanding change. The Johnson family became active participants in these efforts, using their experience to advocate for policies that would prevent others from facing the same injustice. The community's response was a testament to the power of collective action. Neighbors who had once been strangers came together, united by a shared commitment to justice and equity. Fundraisers were organized to support families facing eviction. Legal aid clinics expanded their services, and educational programs raised awareness about tenants' rights. For the Johnsons, the aftermath of the trial was a time of healing and growth. Their home, once threatened, was now a symbol of resilience and hope. Maya's dreams of becoming a lawyer felt more attainable than ever, fueled by the knowledge that the law could be a tool for justice. Elijah's energy returned, his spirit lifted by the support of a community that refused to let him be silenced. Angela and Marcus found strength in each other and in the movement they had helped ignite. They knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but they faced it with renewed determination. Their story was no longer just about survival. It was about transformation. As the sun set over Eastwood, the neighborhood buzzed with a quiet optimism. The Johnson family's victory had sparked a flame that would continue to burn, lighting the way for others who dared to stand up and fight. This was not the end. It was a beginning. The battle for justice was ongoing, and the Johnsons were ready to lead the charge. The story of the Johnson family is more than just a tale of one family's fight to keep their home. It is a powerful testament to resilience, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. In the face of intimidation, discrimination, and systemic barriers, they stood together, refusing to be silenced or pushed aside. Their victory in the courtroom was not just a personal triumph. It was a beacon of hope for countless others who face similar battles every day. Their journey reminds us that justice is not always handed down easily. It requires strength, unity, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The Johnson story shows that when communities come together, when voices rise in unison, change is possible. It is a call to action for all of us, to recognize the injustices around us and to stand up against them. Fair housing is a fundamental right. Yet millions still face discrimination, eviction, and displacement simply because of who they are or where they come from. The fight for equitable housing is far from over, and it demands our attention and our action. Supporting organizations that advocate for tenants' rights, educating ourselves and others about fair housing laws, and speaking out against injustice are ways we can all contribute to this vital cause. Sharing stories like the Johnsons is crucial. It shines a light on the realities many endure in silence and inspires others to find their voice. By spreading awareness, we build a stronger, more informed community ready to challenge inequality and demand accountability. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep within, don't let it end here. Join the movement for justice. Support fair housing initiatives. Volunteer your time, donate to legal aid organizations, or simply start conversations that matter. Every action counts. And remember, this is just one story among many. There are countless others waiting to be told. Stories of struggle, empowerment, and triumph that deserve to be heard. Stay connected, stay informed, and stay engaged. Together, we can create a world where everyone has a safe place to call home. As Maya once said, justice isn't just about winning a case. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. Let that be our guiding light. Thank you for listening. Please share this story, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to stay inspired by more stories of courage and change. The fight for justice continues, and we want you with us every step of the way.